Hello and welcome to our online workshop on data preservation and digital marketing in a post-cookie world. My name's Ian Harris. I think this is the most important webinar we've done. There have been many changes taking place over the past few years around privacy, cookies, recently iOS changes, and I don't think many people really get the scale of the impact of all of this, and even less know what actually they should be doing about it. So thanks for joining. Our aim today is to explain it all to you and to put you ahead of your competitors. Some housekeeping to start with. The webinar should last for about 45 minutes. If you have any questions as we go along, please put them in the chat box at the side of the screen, and we'll spend a few minutes at the end of the presentation to answer as many of these as possible. If we don't get to your question, we will get back to you afterwards, so we'll get every single one answered. I'll assume that I won't use your name when we're answering your questions, but tell me if I can use your name. Okay, so first of all, a little bit about Search Laboratory. If you're not familiar, we're an integrated global digital marketing agency of about 150 people split between offices in the UK and the US. And as well as running campaigns in the channels you see here on the screen, like PPC, SEO, programmatic, social, a big part of what we do is analytics, and we're one of a handful of companies authorized by Google to sell and support Analytics 360. So because of this, we have a team of analytics and tracking experts as well as digital strategists. Your speakers today, so as I say, my name's Ian Harris. I'm the founder and exec chairman of Search Laboratory. I've also got the experts with me. So I've got James Kenny, head of programmatic, and Jimmy McCann, head of digital strategy. And what we'll be going through today is, first of all, I'm going to set the scene and give you some sort of background information as to what's been going on. And then Jimmy is going to take us through the impact of these privacy changes on analytics, and he's going to take us through some relatively simple tech solutions that will mitigate some of the problems that are being caused. And then James is going to do the same thing on advertising. So what's the problems and what are some simple workarounds? So that's Jimmy on analytics and James on advertising. And then what we'll learn is that these workarounds only go so far, and what you really need to do is start to rethink measurement, testing, and advertising if you want to win. So that's the final section. So first of all, background glossary. So just to get everybody on the same page, very simply to start with, first of all, cookies. So here's a browser that's browsing to a site called buypens.com, and the browser requests a page from buypens.com, and buypens.com responds, and it invariably sends back a cookie if it hasn't seen that user before. And then any request from that point forward, that browser will say, yeah, I'm 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You've seen me before. And this is what we call a first party cookie. It's written and read by the site that you're looking at. It strings interactions together, and it strings sessions together if it persists, which we'll come to talk about. So that's a first party cookie. And we're talking about advertising in a post-cookie world. This type of session cookie is not going anywhere. It's an essential for the internet to work. So everyone should understand about that type of cookie. Next, we've got, the same request comes, show me your pens, and buypens.com, our website, responds, but there's a piece of code on the page that says call Facebook. And the browser then pings out to Facebook, buypens.com told me to call you, and Facebook then sets a cookie. And the key thing about this cookie is, if this user then browses to buypaper.com the next day, then and there's the Facebook ping on that page as well, the browser will ping Facebook and it will get the same number back. So it will use that same ID. So Facebook starts to build up a picture of the fact that this user went to buy pens today and buy paper tomorrow, and whatever site this user visits, that same ID is used. And indeed when they visit Facebook as well. So Facebook starts to build up that picture. And that is what we call a third-party cookie, written and read by a different site to the one that you're looking at. So third-party site identifies you whenever it is called. So hopefully page one stuff this for everybody. That's a third-party cookie. The one that I think is sometimes a little bit strange is Google Analytics. So the Google Analytics cookie is actually a first-party cookie. I always think this is a bit strange because Google Analytics is, obviously you look at your analytics on Google property, but it is written as a first-party cookie. So show me your pens. That ID, that Google Analytics ID comes from buypens.com. Okay, and then every time you browse the site, it uses that same ID so that analytics can string it together. This is a first-party cookie. Now, just a little subtlety here. Writing first-party cookies in this way from the server is a little bit of a faff. Google Analytics makes it easy for you by allowing you to put on this piece of script. So this is a page that's being served by buypens.com. It's the welcome page, see our wide range of pens, but on the bottom there is this little piece of JavaScript. And it is that, I won't go into the details of how it happens, but it is that talks to the browser and gets that cookie set. Okay, and this is called a client-side first-party cookie. And the reason these were kind of invented like this is just to make it easy for you, so that to put the analytics cookie on there, to put your analytics tracking on there was very easy. You just paste that code on each page of your website. But this makes this a client-side first-party cookie. You can write the Google Analytics cookie from server side as well. It's a little bit harder to do, but we'll talk about shortly why this might be important. So writing the analytic cookie server side is a good technique. It takes control of your cookies rather than just doing it through a piece of JavaScript. You don't really know what's happening. So it can be written in that way too. Final concept is app tracking. So this is a mobile phone, and when on my mobile I load up the Facebook app, that app may have access to a unique device ID on my phone. So each mobile has got a unique device ID. When Facebook then loads up and calls the Facebook site to get your feed, it can send this device ID. And the significance of this is that Twitter can also access the same device ID if it's allowed. Okay, so this allows sharing between these platforms, so of this user information, so it knows which user you are. This is called device ID, this is app tracking. So advertisers use it to link user data across activity on other apps and websites. Okay, so that's the sort of basic information. Just some now background as to what's been happening with all of this. Privacy and regulation. First of all, privacy. So we split them into privacy and regulation. Within privacy, we have ITP, Intelligent Tracking Prevention. This is an Apple initiative. So on Safari, Apple have decided that third-party cookies, so that thing that pinged Facebook, they are no longer allowed. We're not having those anymore. First-party cookies are only going to persist for 7 days. And by the way, only 1 day if it's client-side. So we start to see the distinction between those server-side cookies being set and client-side cookies being set, even if they're all first-party. So that's ITP. We then have app tracking transparency. So this is the thing that if you've got an iPhone, and you've had the update, it will start to ask you when you go into apps, do you want to allow cross-environment tracking? So this is that thing surfacing the device ID. Most people are saying no to this. So these apps are not getting access to that device ID anymore, most of the time. And then finally, Chrome is following on, but you've probably seen in the news, it's delayed. So Google have delayed the phasing out of third-party cookies until early 2023. Google have got different skin in the game to what Apple have, because Google are a big advertising platform. So they have phased out. They're going to phase out, but only in early 2023. So that's been delayed. And then regulation, that's the other part. That's GDPR and CCPA. That is where you need consent, and no consent, no cookie, i.e. you can't track. Now, what I've said before, this does not apply to those session tracking cookies. They're essential for sites to work. So server-side first-party cookies, but you can refuse analytics cookies, and you've seen these consent forms. You can choose which cookies in essence that you will accept. So what is the impact of all of this, first of all, on your analytics? And I'm going to hand over to Jimmy McCann, our Head of Digital Strategy, to walk you through what's happening there and what you should do.
Thanks, Ian. So yeah, what's actually happened to your first party data? So we'll just go through a bit of a chronology of what's actually happened over the last few years. So to demonstrate this, we have two user paths. So a session is represented by one of the dots, and then we have the user being strung together by the lines. So that's the user path and over multiple sessions. And we have one unsuccessful journey and then one successful journey. So the successful one being a conversion, something that we wanted that user to do. So i.e. fill in a form or purchase something online. So then we take these two sessions and extrapolate that out to multiple sessions, and you can see that there's lots of different user paths of varying lengths, resulted in successful and unsuccessful, some short, some single touch even, and some quite particularly long. So then if we take ourselves back to an earlier digital age, either pre and early smartphone adoption, users tended to undertake browsing behaviors on a lot less devices, on the same browser. So therefore, what Ian just explained there with how we track analytics using that first party cookie, we were able to stitch together that user journey much more efficiently across all of those different touch points. So then as we progressed into a more cross-device age, so you may just see there that we lost some of the lines that strung together some of the dots. So that's caused by the cross-device element. So the first-party cookie is browser-specific. So when you log in on when you're on a different device, then Google Analytics would not be able to associate you with that initial touch point on a different browser, unless you had a more sophisticated Google Analytics implementation, which I won't go into just yet. We then have privacy, which you will have just noticed that we saw more degradation in the lines between the touch points. So privacy is what Ian just explained around ITP. So if there was more than 7 days of inactivity between those sessions, it would reset, it would delete that cookie, and you would be then treated as a new user. So we lose that ability to string that user together. And then we have regulation as well. So regulation is the cookie consent. So you might see there that some of the dots became more transparent than the others, and we also lost some of the touch points that we can string together. So when you don't explicitly grant consent, we would not be able to place a cookie, and therefore we cannot track those users' interactions and conversions using analytics, for example. So what does the degradation in first-party data mean to you? It's basically inaccurate measurement across that full journey. It means that it's broken now, and this is something that has happened over. It's been a gradual process, and it's choked the ability to view those connected paths. So it's the user-specific insight is greatly reduced, and because of all of that, that leads to, you know, the inefficient marketing spend, because you don't have all of the information to hand to make the right decisions. So what should you do? So here we have our broken journeys and unconsented touch points that we can't track. First of all, consent mode is really important. Consent mode is a feature of Google Tag Manager, and what you'll see there is that some of the green dots were restored. So what the consent mode does is it doesn't place a cookie, but it will send a cookieless ping back to a platform like Analytics to designate when a conversion has occurred. We won't be able to string that together to a user, but it should be able to get your conversion numbers in Analytics from your unconsented data up to 70 or 80% of the actual number. The second thing that we should do to preserve our data is adopt GA4. So GA4, Google Analytics 4, is the newest, latest version of Analytics. It's built for today's internet and web and app behavioral interactions. So the reason why that this is much more beneficial in preserving the data is that it's better at stringing a user together. In a single property, you can have a view of the user using a user ID, which is a authenticated, logged in identifier of a user, and it will combine and dedupe that with the client ID, which is set by the cookie on the browser. So we get a much more detailed view of the user. It also uses Google Signals as an identifier if the user has advertising preferences allowed. So this is basically Google using its breadth of knowledge of its logged in users. So it's collecting its data, its own first party data on users, and then being able to dedupe users across devices, etc., in an aggregated context. The other thing that you might have noticed there on GA4 was that some of the more transparent sessions were filled back in. So this is another feature of Google Analytics, is behavioral modeling. So that's a new upcoming feature that will be launched very soon within GA4 platform. And that is basically working the same way as consent mode in modeling out behavioral cookieless interactions. And then the third and final data preservation technique we would recommend is implement server-side GTM. So this is exactly what Ian explained before in terms of setting the cookie server-side. This means that, you know, the browser would, in this case Safari, is impacted by ITP. We're not setting the cookie in the browser, we're setting it at the server side. So therefore, we're not deleting that cookie after 7 days of inactivity. So we're lengthening the window that we can track a user across your interactions on the web. So I can now hand over to James, who can tell us about the advertising platforms.
Thank you, Jimmy. So when it comes to advertising platforms, most of the basic principles remain the same, but there are a few changes to think about because at the end of the day, advertising platforms are third third-party platforms. They don't get the same benefits as first-party cookies would get. They don't get the same sort of benefits as, say, analytics might get. It's functioning as a pseudo first-party cookie. So very quick context for how this works within ad platforms. Third-party data, that being either external data or data that the ad platforms track themselves, is used to either target someone with an ad based on data that the ad platform has gained from behavioral targeting or from their own activity on their own app or website. And then that's also returned back to you in the form of measurement in terms of reporting, conversion tracking, all those sorts of things. So these work in the same cookies and device ID principles, as we mentioned earlier. We already went through a lot on the cookie side of things, with Safari and Firefox losing a lot of the tracking and Chrome delayed but still going. But thinking about device IDs is also incredibly important when it comes to a lot of app traffic, because not only is a lot of user behavior on mobile, but device IDs are very important when it comes to the actual ad platforms themselves. Take Facebook, for example. The vast majority of activity on Facebook is done through the app, and that requires the same level of consent and tracking and rules and regulations as the rest of the internet, meaning that anything you do on Facebook is impacted as well. So we've already seen the impact from iOS 14. Less than 10% of people are agreeing to be tracked on Facebook or on other similar apps. And most recently, Google, early in June, announced that they were going to follow the same principle. They also have an app transparency protocol coming out around about late 2021 to 2022. They haven't announced if it's going to be delayed in the same way that Chrome is, but the point is that the principle remains the same. They're all heading in the same direction. We're all losing this information. So in terms of what this means, in terms of losing this data, it means firstly that we're going to lose, and we have been losing, quite a lot of information in terms of targeting. So audience profiling historically has been heavily based on behavioral modeling, so behavioral tracking. So the Facebook like button, for example, that's on websites has been historically used by Facebook to track users across the web so that it can enhance its tracking. Same with Microsoft tracking across different platforms for LinkedIn and Bing. And without the ability to maintain that user ID, accuracy and granularity is being reduced quite significantly. In terms of remarketing, there's also a significant impact that perhaps some of you may have seen as long-term user journeys. So cases where a user might visit your site and then disappear for a while, do a bit of research, come back a while later, they're unlikely now to be seen by the ad platforms as the same person, because the either user ID, the cookie or ID is disappeared, or the person hasn't consented and there's no ID being returned at all. So in both cases, we're seeing less accuracy with what's going on, and then reduction in what essentially have been some of the key audiences of advertising over the last few years. Additionally, there's measurement. There's a lot of impacts on measurement. Jimmy covered most of what that actually means in terms of tracking the user journey, but it's worth distinguishing between what it means for post-click and post-view conversions, which you may encounter depending on which platforms you're using. So as a general rule, post-click is surviving slightly better than post-view. It gives more opportunity for people to consent. There are still opportunities, even within the cases where people say don't consent, to get limited amounts of data back, depending on exactly what the iOS or in the future Android allow. But the time window of that has been significantly reduced. Anyone, to go at Facebook again as the easiest example, anyone on Facebook who've been advertising recently will have noticed that the windows for attribution have dropped from 28 days to 7 days and 1 day. So, and that comes down to the fact that the data longer than that simply doesn't exist. The longer period, or the bigger impact rather, is coming down to post-view. So that's when someone doesn't click an ad, they just see the ad, and then they engage with the site later, say, most commonly via video and display ads, but you can see them in Google Ads for activity you're doing there. You can see it across paid social as well. Without any direct interaction with your ads or with your activity, it's very difficult to get consent, because people actually need to say visit your site or interact or do something in a way that would allow you to declare that you actually want to be tracked. So this has been significantly hit because of the limitations there. So in most cases now, you'll find that a lot of post-view activity is estimated, or if it isn't estimated, it is significantly reduced in scope and what can be achieved. And as with the first-party data, ultimately this leads to inefficient marketing spend. If you don't do anything, you don't see the same information, you don't get the same audiences. So what does this mean for you? So I've pulled it down to kind of 6 main areas, and these apply to different ad platforms in different ways. I haven't gone into specifics on what each ad platform should do, so take these, go back to your campaigns, and see how you could start to implement these or address these issues within the scope of what you're trying to achieve. So on the targeting side of things, the first thing is to make use of that first-party data. It's been something that we and the rest of the industry has been talking about for a very long time, even independently of all of this, but it's still heavily underused across the board. So do everything we said so far, do everything Jimmy said, do all of that, because you're still going to need a point of reference as best you can for where you're putting your marketing budget. And have a look at what that first-party data is, look at what you can learn from that. Even if you can't directly send it to a platform, it's still information you can use for planning. Additionally, see what you can do to gather data like CRM data at an earlier stage to use in remarketing. Common examples are cases where a news site may get you to add your email so you can read the news story. Or you might have a newsletter or something you can get people to sign up for. In those cases, your own personal CRM data, information about the users who visit your site, that's not cookie-based, that doesn't disappear. So we can make use of that and pass it back to platforms, or just use it for the purposes of profiling in order to ensure that you're still hitting the right groups of people. And if your audience is changing on your site or who engages with you, you can reflect that in your ad targeting. Additionally, look at what other first-party data you can use, other people's first-party data. In this case, you might see it referred to as second-party data because it's you going to someone else and seeing what you can use of their data. Firstly, have a look at what platforms can make use of logged-in users. All targeting is not equal. Some targeting is very behavioral heavy. For example, if people are using third-party audience lists across display from various data warehouses, they're heavily based on cookies. They're going to be impacted. But LinkedIn information, like someone's job title, that's not going anywhere. That is exactly the same as it always is. It's based on what people have put on their profile. Cookies play no part in that kind of tracking. So have a look at what you're using and whether alternatives can be used in cases where you're seeing audiences drop off. Additionally, if you're working with any publishers, if you're working with any kind of third parties or other ad platforms, discuss what they can do with their targeting options. Most of the big platforms out there for display, video, and other affiliate advertising have their own list of tracking that they can use. They have their own first-party data. They've got their own CRM data. Like I said, I mentioned earlier, newspapers tracking, getting emails when people want to read the full story. And that's information that they can keep and they can use and bucket potentially for you to use. So have a chat with them, see what potentially they can put together for you, as they are generally moving towards more bespoke packages for how they deal with advertisers. Finally, have a look at the alternative targeting available to you. Ultimately, when it comes to advertising, this whole audience ID and tracking side of things is one small part of your campaign. It's a significant part, but there is still a lot that you could potentially do, ignoring that altogether if needs be. So contextual targeting still works, and by that I mean what are the keywords that are in use, what topics or categories is the page you're appearing on about, what kind of data is available about the user's device or who or where they are, or what exactly is going on the page that you are trying to advertise to people. So for example, you might want to target reviews. If you can't necessarily remarket to people accurately, you can still look for reviews about your industry or about you and potentially run ads alongside that. Additionally, consider the creative and the placement of where and how you're using the ads. These matter as much, in some cases more, than the actual targeting that you do. So start to invest more time and effort into making sure that, with the amount of people you can reach, you are reaching them with the best message possible in the best way possible, and start to use that data as much as you can. On the measurement side of things, first things first, use your CRM. If you don't have a CRM, get a CRM or some sort of method of tracking what is happening on your site in a way that you can pass back to the platform. So offline conversion tracking, which has been around for a very long time, again, another underused ones. Use that as much as you can. It is very vital to continuing to target people. It'll be very useful in terms of retargeting. It's exceptionally useful in terms of actually tracking the conversions, but also it can play into customer match or lookalike targeting or similar audiences in ways where the platforms use their own signal data, Google, Facebook, and all those. They use their own signal data that they can't necessarily directly share with you, but they still use it for their own machine learning. So, and those are areas where they could potentially still preserve an element of their tracking. Also, make sure your own internal tracking is up to scratch, particularly if you have a long lead time to conversion. Make sure that you are able to maintain information about the user throughout the entire process, so that if someone comes in as a lead, you might know what the source and where they came from is, but make sure that information is being preserved right up until the point where they make their final sale or final interaction with you. Additionally, there are some tracking workarounds. There aren't many, admittedly, right now, but every platform is attempting to in some way. The main example right now that's available outside of the analytics updates is Facebook's conversions API. For people who have used this sort of stuff in the past, you may remember it as server-side API. That's what they used to call it. So that's a good example of one you can do on the Facebook side of things. However, keep an eye on updates from other ad platforms. Talk to your agency, talk to your team, talk to your account manager if you have one, and make sure that if new things are coming, that you're in line to implement them as soon as possible. And then finally, align your tracking across all the platforms. We've seen no shortage of companies and businesses that have different tracking depending on which platform they're looking at. And it wasn't a bigger deal in the past because analytics could put it all together, but you're losing that information now. So you need to start passing that information directly to all the platforms so that they can actually use it. So that means if you're tracking a purchase, even if you're just reporting the revenue in analytics and you don't care what Google ads or Facebook or something else says, still track the purchase in those platforms, because often those platforms can't use what analytics knows and they need to optimize towards something. So make sure that when you are setting up a conversion or an event, something you want to track, you're setting it up in every platform. And if you have a lot of platforms going and you don't have a tag manager solution, get Google Tag Manager or a tag manager to make this an easier process, because you could set up a trigger, a rule that says, okay, this is when a purchase happens, and you can just attach as many pixels as you want to it. And it'll ensure that if you need to make any changes to your site, you can just turn around and edit that one trigger and it will update all your tracking for you in one go and make your life a lot easier. Finally, to kind of go back to Jimmy's walkthrough of the user journeys, as we've gone from sort of this full view to this partial view, there are a lot of elements where we are still seeing progression down the funnel, but we're not seeing the full flow and the full direction of how users are going, which means that first touch to last touch, you might not know is the same person. You might not be able to track that full set of information. So start to look at the bigger picture of what you're actually trying to achieve and what you're actually trying to measure, because this end on the left is branding. This is, the initial introduction to your business. This is people coming to you for the first time, and that has a different KPI than everything happening at the other end in terms of results and revenue and leads or whatever the conversion is that you're trying to drive. And in many cases, with the best will in the world, we're not going to be able to join all that information together anymore. But that doesn't mean you can't still work on pushing people down the funnel. It doesn't mean you can't still put effort into tracking something and some kind of output. So have a look at what you're doing and what an engagement with your website or what brand awareness looks like for your business, and start running activity that focuses on pushing a group of suitable people down that funnel. And then you can pick them up in another campaign and get them to finally convert. And you might not know it's the full person throughout, but the user journey and the concept of the user journey hasn't changed, even though we can't track it. So make sure that even if you can't see it, you're still putting in all the effort to look at pushing people down the funnel, rather than just focusing at the end, the right-hand side here, on the stuff you could immediately track. Otherwise, everyone else who's doing it will do it for you. And now I'll pass back to Jimmy to talk about the final section and where we go from here.
Thanks, James. So yeah, where do we go from here? So as James just alluded to, it's, you know, we cannot join all those dots. It's not that there's a solution to replace everything that we have there and be able to see that full journey. We must undertake a process, and this process is you know, these 4 points. It's preservation of your data, it's enriching that data with your own first-party data, it's taking on analysis projects to uncover insight, and then it's being able to activate those insights in your advertising. So I'm going to go through each of these with the examples. So data preservation example is what we just explained before in the previous section, in that you must preserve as much as you can through consent mode, through GA4, stitching together that user journey, and then mitigating the ITP via server-side GTM. What we mean by enrichment is it's taking all your web and app interaction data that you might be collecting in GA4, for example, and information in there would be geolocation, channel keywords, page views, etc. And then we can combine that data with your own offline CRM data. So that's a good example of enrichment. So we could understand whether the form actually resulted in a conversion of the customer into a paying customer. For an e-commerce context, we could understand what that person bought throughout their entire lifetime or over a 12-month period, for example. Or we could even weave in any customer personas that you might already have within your CRM and join that with what they did online. So it's that combination of the online and the offline behaviors and characteristics that's important there. So then once we do that, we have preserved and enriched data on the left-hand side. We can then combine that with the technology that exists these days in for example, Google Cloud, and be able to work with that using an engineer, a cloud engineer. So there's machine learning, AI, there's all sorts of different technologies and models that we can apply using on big data sets in that environment to produce projects and insight such as the following. So we could potentially score leads. So instead of having a very binary 0 or 1 for a form, we can have a large breadth and a scale to how good a lead might be based on their interactions. We might also be able to predict a lifetime value based on all of our offline data and what users who looked like them turned out to be. So we could add a prediction as to, you know, they bought this for £20. However, we predict them to be worth 150 over the course of a 12-month period. There's audience scoring, which would be you might be able to understand what their interactions were and how valuable those engagements were, and be able to filter and segment high value, low value, and medium value interactions, and do things with that, as I'll lead on to shortly. There's also the customer segmentation piece, where you would take potentially your CRM personas and be able to replicate that within an online environment against all of those users and their interactions. And then there's also another example such as attribution, which would take all of your information available and produce a value for each activity and help you budget. And then the final piece is just basically taking all of those examples of data projects and insights that we could pull out of those and activate that in advertising. So an example of how you would activate the lead scoring is you would bid to a maximize ROAS smart bidding algorithm, for example, in Google Ads or SA360. You could change the number that you optimize in an e-commerce environment from a last click transaction value to a predicted lifetime value for that user, and that could revolutionize the way that you apportion budgets and your spend for paid search. Audience scoring would help you get better at remarketing. We can use first-party data through customer match, using that as well, and to target similar audiences that are more higher value audiences that we feel would be more efficient ways of spending remarketing budgets. The customer segmentation piece could lead to more integrated messaging across platforms. So, for example, if you're creating these persona segments, you can upload your first-party data in the advertising platforms for people at varying stages and be aligned with your messaging for those users at any given stage. And then finally, attribution. You could activate that through bidding to the reattributed numbers and building better budgeting decisions from those activities. So to sum this piece up, it's, we're very much saying that the left-hand side, preserving and enriching your data, is absolutely essential, and it's something that should be done immediately now. And then how to use that enhanced data is all about the analysis projects and then activating it. So you can get ahead of your competitors if you undertake those two items on the left-hand side.
Okay, thanks, Jimmy. So I'll just provide a bit of a summary then, because there's a lot in this. So, I mean, this situation now has been eroding for the past few years. It's come into sharp focus with iOS 14.5 and also the loss of third-party tracking more recently. So it's come into sharp focus, but it's been happening for years. Which means your advertising has probably been quite efficient for some time. There are some things to do immediately that we've discussed, such as consent mode, the GA4 upgrade, server-side GA cookie, the Facebook conversions API, uploading your offline conversions. So there's all those things that we've talked about that you really should be doing right now. Write yourself a list and do all of those things. But to get ahead, you need to look at clever ways to optimize your unique situation. And Jimmy's talked about a few there conceptually, but these really are bespoke to what your situation is, what advertising platforms you use, what data you have. Can you get people to log in as early as possible? Some people can't, but some people can. You can give them a brochure request or a newsletter sign up or whatever. So what is your unique situation? What first-party data do you have? How can you join it? What machine learning techniques can you use? And we've done this plenty of times. So if you need help going through this process, then please do get in touch. Indeed, for any of these things, upgrading to GA4, any things that we've talked about. It's hard. It's not plug and play anymore. So yeah, if you do need help, let us know. We do have our data and privacy resources hub on our website, which has got loads of resources on there. There's podcasts and articles and different things that have been happening and different workarounds. But yeah, have a read of that and please get in contact if you have any further questions. So with regard to questions, let's just have a look. Yeah, as I say, if you do have any questions, please put them in the chat box, ask anything you want, and we will try and answer as fully as possible. So just while anyone puts any questions in there, let me just check I can see. Okay, so yeah, so we've got this question. with Google delaying what the rollout of their kind of version of ITP, why now? Why not wait until 2023 for that to start doing some of this stuff? So maybe James could answer that one.
Sure. The main answer is because if you're not doing it, someone else is. Yes. Digital marketing and advertising is a zero-sum game. So and a lot of people are starting to, interact with these new elements, and if they're with an agency like us, then we're pushing them to do it. So it's the kind of thing where, despite the fact it's been a gradual process, it's starting to become more in the public eye. There's starting to be more public pressure to do these things. So, you're seeing Google, which really, really wants to keep this data, even there, 6 weeks after iOS 14.5 came out, they turned around and said, we're going to do the same thing, because they know that's the direction things are going, even though it's not in their interest. So it's been going there for quite a long time, and it's something which, if you don't have the same data and information and ability to target someone else does, and they're one of your competitors, then you're going to be losing out on revenue, on results that you could otherwise be getting. The other side of things is that what we described, it's quite complicated. The stuff Jimmy went through at the end is really hard to understand. It's not something that is industry standard in a lot of cases. It's all quite new, and maybe one day it will be, but right now it's something which you may need to review your structure, may need to review your teams, may need to review how you're actually planning on pulling all this off, and that takes time. It's not just a matter of clicking a button, turning things on. It's a matter of reviewing your entire model and your campaign plan and your measurement plan and working out what that is. And the sooner you do it, the less painful it's going to be, essentially, because even with delays, it's still happening. It's not going to go away, and no one's going to get rid of it. So it's, might as well do it now. You've now been given an extra year from Chrome to take advantage of it, and actually, take your time and do it properly.
Okay, thanks, James. So we got a good question here. All of this sounds fantastic, but strikes me that the option is only really going to be available to larger businesses with big budget. What options are available for smaller SMEs and startups? So just to clarify some of the essentials that we've talked about. So GA4 upgrade. GA4 is free. Server-side tracking, again, it's free technology. Consent mode is part of GTM. I'm sure it's part of the free version. Jimmy, just confirm that for me.
I would add to that as well that you previously with Universal Analytics, you didn't have a hit level stream into BigQuery environment. GA4 has a native a stream into BigQuery, so for the first time you can access something that was only available to GA360 customers. And once
so you're getting some paid technology there out of the box with GA4 for free.
And that's it. Once it's in the cloud environment, then you can do something with it. And you need abundant data to do some of the more advanced projects, but there's still benefits there to have your CRM and connected with your web behavioral data.
So whoever asked this question, you're probably right that there are certain more advanced things. We're talking about cloud technology using AI and the like. Again, those are largely free technologies, but the consultancy to put those sort of things together, you're right, they're probably expensive projects. But a lot of the stuff that we've talked about today is the new way of doing it, and the sooner you get on it, the better. And it is free. You might need some hand holding to help you onto it, but don't shy away from it because you're a smaller company or because you're a startup. If you're a startup, you know, some of the big companies are going to struggle with this even more because they've built so much legacy around systems that no longer work. So everybody get on it straight away. I don't know if there's anything else to add from anyone else on that, but get on it. Is regulation going to have a greater impact moving forwards? I don't know who wants to chip in here. I mean, what?
I can probably chip in a little bit.
Go on, James.
The answer is probably yes, because quite frankly, most people aren't following the existing regulation. You know, the existing GDPR regulations are very explicit in terms of you have to ask for consent. It has to be extremely clear that you're asking for consent. And if people don't do the very, very specific thing that you need them to do to require consent, which they'll, you know, needs to be, you know, very informed, you shouldn't track anything. And people haven't done so much with it because the EU or, you know, the California and all those kind of things, they haven't necessarily come down too hard yet, but they're going to, and they are starting to in some cases. There are starting to be impacts. One thing we always used to point to as like why should you be too worried yet about all the cookie tracking changes was the fact that Amazon had for years completely flouted the rules by having a banner that just said by using the site you agree to cookies, which is completely against regulation in every way. Even they've changed their rules now, and they don't normally like to follow them. So there's a lot that ultimately everyone kind of is getting on board with it, and the public is more aware of it as well, which means there's a lot more political and industry pressure on these companies and governments to do it. So yeah, long run, the regulation side of things, especially in sort of the West, EU, US, all those kind of places, will have a, you know, the expectation is that it will become kind of the initial barrier, I suppose, to everything else, and the technology will kind of follow on from there, because to do any of, you know, any tracking, anything, any of the stuff, fundamentally you need consent. So not having that does kind of limit what other options are available under kind of the current system before the one we're talking about now.
Okay, thanks, James. We've got a good question here. Apart from GA4 for tracking, are there any CRM tools you could recommend for SMEs? So for B2B, so that's people that generate, that want form fills. They're trying to get inquiries. For B2B, there's a number of options available. Salesforce is always very popular. You pay per seat, so you don't have to pay a fortune to get all the functionality, and it's got very good links to analytics out of the box. So for example, you know, you get an inquiry and the inquiry goes into Salesforce. If that inquiry then turns into a live prospect or into a sale, you can feed those events back into analytics very easily and optimize to them. So we always think Salesforce is a good one, but there are other CRMs available, and many of them do these things. In terms of e-commerce, the CRM really becomes that's your customer. That's normally, you know, linked to your web shop, and generally it's whatever comes with that. So there again, there's a myriad of CRMs available. To a certain extent, it doesn't really matter as long as you can get to the data. Some of the clever stuff that we do, we end up taking CRM data, analytics data, and putting it all into BigQuery, which is a data warehouse, and it doesn't really matter what it's coming from, as long as it's got the fields that you need, you know. Jimmy, you probably work in these more than anybody else. Is there any sort of preferences that you have?
Yeah, I would just say that, you know, even in a bespoke database CRM, as long as you have you're collecting you know, client ID and user ID across both GA and the CRM, then you have the ability to, even if it's not a live join piping data back into GA, for example, you'll be able to take that offline and then join them offline in a BigQuery environment or whatever. So that is, as long as you have the facility to do that against the users.
Okay. So yeah, really anything, as long as it's got fields and some, you know, some way of storing client ID and user ID. These are 2 fields in analytics that you need to use to join. We're running out of time, so any other questions? If you have any further questions, please send them to us on an email, or, you know, just go to our website and put an inquiry on, and we'll get back to you. It's a big topic. If you do need any help with it, we're helping people through this all the time. So yes, all that remains is to say thanks for joining. There's all our contact details should you need to ask any questions or if you need any help. Thanks to James and Jimmy, and yeah, hopefully see everyone on the next one. Thanks.